connecting to cloud server, and recording has started. Okay, so tonight is, of course, the third session in the Meditation from Sinai course. Last week, we set out to discover spirituality, and we defined it as being able to see the world through the eyes of our souls and not as we see it through our physical eyes. And of course, the problem is that since we are materially and physically orientated human beings, the spiritual life force within creation is somewhat abstract and quite difficult to touch, and we don't naturally perceive it. What we do perceive is the body and its perceptions, and that, of course, obscures the soul. So we have this enormous attempt to reach into our souls and to try to see the world through its perspective. And we discussed 3 different authentic Jewish meditation techniques last week. And then we settled on the Hitbonnut meditation technique as the one which would be most appropriate for our purpose. Just to remind us that in Hitbonnut meditation, the idea is that one thinks very, very deeply on the spiritual nature of reality and how God animates the world. And we think about it with such vividness and with such powerful visualization that the concept becomes real in our minds, and then it impacts upon our feelings, because as we learned in the very first session, feelings will always follow thoughts. So Hitbonnut meditation, perhaps in contrast to other forms of meditation that are outside of the Jewish sphere, aims not to transcend or to escape our everyday experiences in order to discover spirituality, but to try and reframe our experiences by noticing the spirituality that lies within them. So it's something which happens by looking at what we are actually doing rather than searching for something outside of ourselves. And the value of meditation, of this form of meditation, is not only for the actual time that we're meditating, and not even for the short while that the effects of the meditation still continue to linger, but the real goal of Hitbonnut meditation, using the power of our minds and visualization, is to help us to shift our mindset so that we have an entirely new frame of reference for life in general, a different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. And that's a deeper way, really, of interacting with the world. Now, when we introduced the practice of Hitbonnut meditation, we chose a particular passage to meditate on. And we sought then, last week, to understand and to make real in our mind 3 connected ideas. I'm going to share screen and take us back to the slide that we looked at that time to help us to refresh our memories. So the first idea was that everything has a soul. The world has a divine force that animates every part of reality. The second idea was that the soul is actually the source of life. Now, this divine element that we're talking about is not just another dimension that is alongside and equal to the physical dimension. It is actually the inner life of the physical. And without it, the physical has absolutely no meaning. And that led us to the third idea, and that is that if that is the case, that spirituality underpins the whole of the universe and that the physical really has no value without it, then it is the spiritual that should be valued and not the physical. So those were that was the idea that the Hitbonnut meditation that we introduced last week. And I'd recommend to you that you might want to go back, because this was very foundational, and you might want to go back after tonight's session just to that part of the recording when we introduced the Hitbonnut meditation, and how we explained these three elements of that everything has a soul, that the soul is a source of life, and therefore that spirituality should be valued. We almost said it was A, B, C, the one followed on from the other. Now, when we introduced the term Hitbonnut in the last lesson, we said that it was rooted in the Hebrew word bina, which means to understand or to contemplate, because it is, after all, a contemplative. It is a form of meditation which depends upon contemplation. But Hitbonnut is also rooted in another Hebrew word, the word for building, binyan. So you see that in Hitbonnut, binyan. You'll see this very briefly in text number 1 on page 80, where we have the following: the Hebrew word Hitbonnut, contemplative meditation, stems etymologically from two root words, binyan, building, and bina, contemplation. When we practice cognitive meditation, we build ourselves as a result of gaining a more profound understanding of our environment. And you just see this depicted graphically in figure 3.1 on page 81. So building on a concept, the concept upon which one is meditating, then helps to expand and to broaden one's comprehension of that topic. And of course, subsequently, our feelings as well. And so that is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to build on last week's Hitbonnut meditation by adding to it 3 additional concepts that, of course, flow from those ideas, and that these will then help us to deepen tonight our spiritual perspective and further develop our consciousness of God in the world. So we learned last week that just as we possess a body and a soul, and our soul is the life force that animates the body and makes it function, so too, by analogy, the world has a spiritual force that animates and creates material reality. And in the same way that a person's truest identity is their soul, so too it follows that the truest identity of the material world is the spiritual force and the meaning that animates it. But what we didn't define last week was what was the nature of the spiritual force? How do we define it? How does it function? And so the first building concept that we're going to introduce tonight is the additional idea that this spiritual force that we're talking about that animates the world, the spiritual force of creation, is not static. You see, electricity, the electricity that makes an appliance work, is a very impersonal and a distant force. God's presence in the world, by contrast, is a dynamic and a conscious force. And to explain this idea, we're going to turn to the Midrash in text number 2 on page 82, which I shall read. King David exclaimed, Barachi nafshi et Adonai, my soul blesses God. Why did he feel, asks the Midrash, why did he feel the need to emphasize that it was his soul that praised God? He told himself, just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the universe. And so King David concluded, let the soul, which possesses the same qualities as God, praise him. Well, let's look at this more closely. So the Midrash explains in this Psalm 103 that King David compared the way that God is present within the world to the way in which the soul functions in the body. And his imagery, therefore, teaches us 3 things that we're now going to explore further. Firstly, that the spiritual energy within the world is not just an abstract spiritual energy. It's a spiritual energy that is driving everything in the universe constantly. In fact, it is God's constant presence being manifest in the world. Secondly, that it fills the world and is present in every detail of creation. And thirdly, that it consciously guides reality. So we're going to just do another share screen to summarize this in the next slide. That's the first idea we're going to explore, that God's presence is manifest in the world. The second is that he fills the world and is present in every detail. And that it's a conscious soul that actually guides reality. We'll keep this up for a moment while I continue to explain it. So to understand King David's analogy, think for a moment about a human soul. It can't be seen anywhere within the person, but there's no part of a person in which it isn't present. The soul is the essence of the life force of the body, and if every limb and fiber of the person is alive, obviously the soul must be present everywhere. And every movement and function of the body is also an expression of the soul's consciousness. The soul provides the energy to every limb to function in its unique way. The ear to hear, the eye to see, the hands to move. And when you move your hands, your body is not just randomly moving on its own. That movement is the result of a conscious mental soul process being passed down through the nerves, which then informs the muscles that cause your hand to move. Of course, we are unaware of this because it happens so naturally and at such speed. But hands don't move by themselves. And exactly the same is true in the world, in this analogy that King David wants to make between the soul and the world. It's not a lifeless spiritual entity. There's something which is just behind creation. It's a conscious soul that is within creation, directing the flow of reality in real time. Text number 3 on page 83 reads as follows. A highly detailed self-awareness of the manner in which our soul operates within our body will allow us to appreciate that the divine is manifest within every detail of the universe, and that each detail exists and is sustained through divine energy. This parallel is expressed in the teaching that just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the world. And it is expressed in the verse, "From my flesh, I can understand the workings of the divine." Every sensation and experience of the body, even the most insignificant, is an active expression of the soul. And similarly, even the smallest detail or phenomenon within the universe is actively directed by God. And when we develop this awareness, we sense not only the divine providence in everything, but we see divinity clearly wherever we turn. We can literally see the divine exposed. So every existence and every movement in this universe is God's doing. It's not an outside force controlling the world, but it is a conscious force giving life and movement to the world from within. God is not a distant entity that uses some sort of spiritual creative force to bring the world into existence and then to leave it. He is within the world and consciously shaping and directing it. And moreover, this presence in the world is not in some vague way. As the soul of reality, God is invested in every single detail of the world. What makes one created element different from another? Why are leaves green and wood brown? What causes some plants to grow a certain way and others differently? Why are some objects light and others heavy? What causes some animals to thrive in hot climates and others need cool climates? Of course, science can trace many of these things to the chemical makeup or the DNA of each object. But go behind that. What forms those chemicals? Who defines the nature? Every detail of every species is a result of a unique, tailored soul that God is actively investing in it. Text number 4 on page 85. The entirety of creation divides into 4 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Each of these is subdivided into myriads of specific species. If we examine the world of plants, for example, we encounter a broad spectrum of vegetation, such as trees, crops, vegetables, grass, and herbs, each category of which is further divided into multiple species. There is an astonishing variety of trees, and each kind is unique and distinguished from all other trees. There's a tremendous diversity of plants and herbs, and again, each kind offers a unique nutritional value. Some are beneficial, while others are poisonous, and they each carry a unique design and set of properties. Furthermore, within each of these subspecies, there are countless individual units, each of which is similarly unique. Now, each individual unit possesses a unique life force, a divine energy that is tailored for it. That life force is what we call its soul, the spiritual entity that animates it, causes it to grow, and guides everything that happens to it from the moment it sprouts from the earth until its last moment when it is plucked. Even the plant's final fate is within the jurisdiction of a specific divine providence that determines whether the plant will be harvested for an overt purpose, such as animal fodder, trampled underfoot in an apparently aimless manner, or wither in due course and disintegrate entirely. Such a matter is the result of a specific decision and calculation of divine providence. Everything in this world has a unique divine energy that is its life and guide. Each blade of grass is unique. It may appear identical to another blade, but closer examination reveals specific features that set a specific blade apart from every other blade of grass in the universe. This distinction is the result of the specific divine energy that God invests into this blade. It is an entirely individualized divine manifestation. That is from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's mind-blowing, really. So hard to grasp, so big. What a big idea to get our heads around. There are approximately 8.7 million unique species on Earth. And every one of these species has unique characteristics that differentiates it from others. For example, every type of leaf has a unique shape, a distinct color and texture, specific nutritional value, etc. Every detail of every species is that way because God, the soul of the species, is investing a unique energy into it, forming it to be that way. And now, take this idea one step further. Within every species, each individual unit has its own unique circumstance and journey. The soul doesn't just define the physical properties of the material world, but it also shapes and guides its individual fate. So once again, just take a look at the slide that we looked at a moment ago, and that will move us then on to the next one. So this is what we've been trying to explain. That God's presence is manifested in the world, that he fills the world and is present in every detail, and that it's a conscious soul that guides reality. And that's how we see the uniqueness of creation. First of all, at the level of species, and then the level of characteristics, drilled down to the level of the fate of every creature in this universe. So the astonishing extent to God's intimate involvement in every detail of the universe is expressed in a midrashic statement in text number 5 on page 86. A very famous statement, by the way. Rabbi Shimon said, each blade of grass has a spiritual force. By the way, the Hebrew word is a mazal. I'm a Rabbi Simon, sorry, it's not Shimon, Simon, Rabbi Simon. Ein lecha kol esev ve'esev she'ein lo mazal. There's not a single blade of grass in this universe that does not have a mazal, which we have translated here as a spiritual force, that strikes it and tells it to grow. So God then is literally within everything in our world, guiding its journey, determining its fate. He is what is causing the plant to grow and how fast it'll grow and how tall it'll grow. He's the force that guides the movements and the interactions of every single object in this world. So when you see a blade of grass grow from the earth, you're witnessing a conscious spiritual process. You are seeing God's force in the world. And therefore, by observing the world, you are seeing God. Just meditating on this single idea gives one an incredible appreciation for the vastness of our universe, of the world, and for the vastness of God. And it must therefore open to us an experience of life that is going to be richer and deeper, because we're seeing the universe in an entirely new light. You can't look at anything in the world in the same way again. Imagine the joy of a person who couldn't see color, and they were given a pair of glasses that would help them to give them the ability to be able to experience color. Now, nothing new has actually been added to the world. Everything they see now was always there before, but now it radiates with life and with light. They are experiencing a whole new dimension of the world, which is bursting with color and light. And they're seeing now that even the most insignificant thing could bring them joy because they see the color in it. back in the 1960s, hippies in America began to experiment with LSD and psychedelic drugs, and the whole objective of it was to be able to see the world in exactly this way. I remember the accounts, of people saying, wow, you couldn't believe it. These were young men that I studied with in yeshiva, had been coming out of America and out of the drug scene and out of ashrams, and they were talking about their psychedelic experiences and how they just saw the world. They could just look at a flower and they could see it in an entirely different way, that it was mind-blowing. Yeah. And you know what? Jews have been achieving the same thing through Hitbonnut for generations. This is what it's like to become aware of God's presence in the world. Everything suddenly radiates with a new life and a different energy. And it gives a person a sense of joy. There's really a lovely illustration of this, which the Baal Shem Tov shared in response to someone who asked him why his followers were always so happy. And in text number 6 on page 81, one of the grandsons of the Baal Shem Tov writes the response. It's a lovely piece. And it reads as follows. The following parable I heard from my master, my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov of blessed memory. There was once a talented musician that played beautiful, sweet music. All who heard it were mesmerized by the sweet, pleasurable, blissful sounds. They could not hold themselves back from dancing to the rafters in sheer ecstasy. The closer the people drew to the source of the music, the more entranced they became and the more ecstatic their dancing. Just then, a deaf individual came across the scene. Not noticing the musician, he simply observed people dancing wildly and he regarded them as crazy. What on earth could make people so ridiculously joyful all of a sudden? He muttered to himself. Now, if he were intelligent, wise, and knowledgeable, he would deduce that they must be dancing to a delightful melody. In fact, contemplating the depth of pleasure they must be experiencing, judging by their response, he would be even moved to join in their delightful dance. And the analogy is obvious. The Baal Shem Tov said, my Hasidim are moved by the melody that issues forth from every creature in God's creation. If this makes them appear mad to those with less sensitive ears, should they therefore cease to dance? So that therefore is our first Hitbonnut building that we have tonight. That God's presence is manifest in the world. He is present in every detail. He is conscious. He is the conscious guiding soul of all reality. And that's the piece upon which one would then meditate in the way in which we've tried to explain it. And that then leads us to our second building concept tonight. If God is consciously and actively present in every small detail, if we become aware that God isn't a distant concept or an elusive being, and that he is within every object and within every experience, it follows that he is literally here with us in every moment of our lives. Imagine for a moment that you're holding the hand of someone close to you, and for whatever reason, you can't see their face or communicate with them. And all that you can feel is the warmth of their skin and the tremor of their muscles. Just by feeling their hand, you can sense the life force that's within them. And you can feel an intimate closeness with that person. Not with their body, by the way, but with them. with their soul. Since their life and soul is within the warmth and the movement of their hand, you feel the presence of that person, that simple encounter, just the encounter with their hand. And I think, by the way, that this is what a dying person feels when somebody who loves them is at their bedside and holding their hand. I know that my mum, when she passed away of blessed memory just over 2 years ago, with her children around her, holding her hand, she felt our presence. Our souls were connected, but her eyes were closed and she couldn't see us. All she could feel was our hands, but our hands were the whole of us. And that's the same feeling that we can experience with God, because we don't see the divine openly. But if we meditate on his presence within everything, we can feel his closeness in every part of our lives, just as if he was holding our hand, or we are holding his hand without being able to see him. Because his life is pulsating through every moment, through every movement, through every experience, through every object. Every single moment is an encounter with God. And our lives therefore become filled with an intense awareness of his presence. The Baal Shem Tov again, in text number 7 on page 89. Meditating on the fact that the divine presence fills the entire universe and that God's intimate presence is with you constantly, this will allow you to be constantly joyful, realizing and believing with perfect faith that the divine presence is with you and protecting you. Realize that you're gazing at the divine and that God is gazing at you. God can do as he pleases and is the source of all the goodness and suffering in the world, for his divinity and sustaining force is within each item of existence. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz was a very prolific thinker and profound thinker. He was a prolific writer. He was something of a very, very dear spiritual mentor to Lindy and to me. He was a Chassid who lived in Yerushalayim, and he passed away just over 2 years ago. And he describes how on one occasion he had an opportunity to travel to New York to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. And during his encounter with the Rebbe asked him how his wife was. And he responded, she was well, but not with him. He said he had come alone on the trip to New York. And the Rebbe said to him, what do you mean you are alone? A Jew is never alone. God is always with you. Well, look, as we've said before, tonight and on the other occasions, the objective of Jewish meditation is not to give one a momentary high or a sudden flash of insight. It is an attempt to permanently shift our perspective of reality. And the more we think about these concepts, and the more deeply we analyze them and try to relate to them, the sharper and more vivid and more meaningful the image becomes. And eventually, the goal is to shift our consciousness to the point where we live with a constant mindfulness. A little bit more from the Baal Shem Tov, text number 8 on page 90. It is a tremendous achievement to constantly meditate on the fact that we are close to God and that we are literally and entirely encompassed by his presence. We should try to remain connected to this reality to the extent that reflection becomes unnecessary because we mentally envision God everywhere, constantly. At that point, we say that God is the place of the world. He pre-exists all of existence, and all of our existence exists within God. This includes, of course, each of us as well. And with this meditation, we fulfill the directive recorded in the Code of Jewish Law, V'shavita Hashem lenegdi tamid, to set God before us at all times. Again, it's like wearing glasses with colored lenses. You see everything with a colored tinge. Without having to put in any effort, the lenses will color your view. And the purpose of meditation for us, therefore, is to visualize the world as colored by the lens of divine consciousness, to the point that you begin to see God's presence even when you're not meditating on it. So that is our second building, Hitbonnut, tonight. That God is with us in every moment of our lives. It's time to have a meeting with Rabbi Leibowolf.
Design underlies every aspect of creation. It's quite amazing that as you note the world, you find that everything possesses an element of design. Doctors, scientists, artists all point to the fact that design creates for them the pattern of what their work is all about. Underlying design is a designer. Keep that in mind. Lift your flower and observe it. Have a good look at it. Look at the petals. See the thin veins, the pattern inscribed. Beyond the petals, look deep within, and you might see the ovule deeply embedded within, from which grows the stigma. Amazing, every flower with the same elements. Gently close your eyes and bring to mind that flower that you have in your hand. Become aware of its exquisite color, a shade that's difficult to verbalize. And remember, every flower is subtly different, designed subtly differently. Raise the flower to your nose. What is its scent? Its perfume? If you were to find a word to describe that scent, what would it be? Touch one of the petals. Press it lightly. Feel its texture. Soft. It may even be furry. Its unique texture. In your mind's eye, imagine a bee flying into the flower, looking for the pollen deep within, buzzing with satisfaction. Listen to that buzz. A flower is one of the most sensuous creations that God has made in the universe. You are that flower. You have a pattern, a unique pattern, a unique structure. You are a flower that God has created in His garden, in its garden, in her garden. Admire the you that possesses so many aspects of clear design. And design means purpose. You have been designed for your purpose. The world is a flower. The world possesses design. The world is purposeful. At all times, be aware, be mindful of the innate beauty and uniqueness of design in the world, in creation. And that way, relate to the designer and the purpose God has for you individually.
Well, that leads us to our third building concept tonight. As we become more conscious of the soul in the universe, the immanent divine presence that fills reality, it leads us to the next realization, that nothing happens by chance. If the soul of every object guides its direction and fate, and if God is investing unique energy into every object and movement, then it follows that everything that happens is through his conscious guidance and part of his master plan, that everything has a purpose, that everything is on purpose. Well, of course, often we aren't consciously aware of God's guiding hand in the world. Things seem to be happening on their own, following a natural flow. But even the seeming continuous flow of nature is also the conscious workings of God. And once again, we turn to King David, as he put it in Psalm 147, and as we will see in text number 9 on page 91. He covers the heavens with clouds, prepares rain for the earth, and causes mountains to sprout grass. He gives an animal its food, and as well to the hungry young ravens that call out. Nothing in this world just happens. Even what we perceive as the natural order is God choosing to abide by the rules of nature that he put in place. But God is attentive to every detail of the world, and every occurrence is ordained from heaven. Whether a leaf will be pulled off by a child or blown away in the wind, if it will end up being used in tea or as a decoration at a wedding, or as a prop in a preschool classroom, all of this is guided by God, the soul of the leaf. Natural order from this perspective is actually just a series of continuous miracles, and none of it is by chance. Occasionally, we can notice the force directing the world that is beyond our control, and inexplicable things sometimes happen that we weren't expecting in the least. We've all had these sorts of things happen to us, things which didn't turn out the way in which we planned, or one tried to do everything that we did everything the right way. It should have been predictable, but it just wasn't. Or perhaps the other way around, we weren't set up for success at all, and unexpectedly an opportunity came our way that we couldn't possibly have planned for. So you can attribute this luck or bad luck to chance. But with the awareness that we've been focusing on in this lesson, it isn't a huge stretch of the imagination or of the mind to acknowledge that there is a hand guiding everything as part of God's master plan. And yes, there are moments in our lives when the master plan is visible, when we are aware that there's a force at play that is beyond what we could have expected. And sometimes we even have an idea as to why it happened that way, or at least we think we know why it happened that way. And sometimes you just have a glimpse, like the veil is opened, and you suddenly see the workings of God. Something that happened years ago, which looked inexplicable at the time and even disastrous, suddenly falls into place in the pattern as it emerges. And we get a glimpse, but only a glimpse. But it isn't only at those moments that the divine hand is intervening. Everything, even the times when we don't appreciate why things are the way they are, or we don't even notice anything out of the ordinary, even then it is being directed by the soul of the universe, in other words, by God. So the question is, how does that then impact upon us? How does knowing that there's a master plan make a difference to our lives, other than just a piece of insight? Well, when we develop the awareness and when we get to the point where we can acknowledge intellectually, emotionally, the divine master plan that is guiding all of reality, our attitude to everything is going to change. Our lives have to become calmer, more serene, more settled. Just think about so many of our frustrations and negative feelings born out of the reality of having not met our expectations, of things not turning out the way in which we envisioned them to be. We're jealous of others because we think that we should be more like them or have what they have. We have guilt of the past for not having been the way it should have been. We get depressed because the present isn't what we expect it to be. We get anxious about the future not working out as we'd like it to. We feel angry or hurt when something happens to us that we don't think should have happened to us, a sense of injustice. We lose self-confidence when we feel that we're not as good as we should be. We feel insecure if we're just not sure if our lives are going in the direction they should. So within our regular mindset, everything that didn't or doesn't go exactly as we envisioned it is a challenge and inevitably a disappointment. But if we live with the awareness that every detail of our lives, from the personality and skill set that we were born with and the family and life situation that we have, all the way through to the circumstances and the experiences that we face and everything that happens to us, if we have the awareness that all of this is directed intentionally by God, then our whole perspective changes. He deliberately arranged our lives exactly this way for a specific reason that is often beyond our comprehension. Everything that we are about and everything that happens to us is exactly as it is supposed to be. The all-knowing God has designed our lives perfectly. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote the following letter to a troubled person. It's text number 10 on page 93. With reference to your writing about doubts and difficulty and about a feeling of insecurity in general, I trust that it is unnecessary to elaborate to you at length that such feelings arise when a person thinks that he is alone and can only rely upon himself and his own judgment, and therefore feels doubtful and insecure about each move that he has to make. And while he also trusts in God, this trust is somehow superficial, without permeating him and his way of life in every detail. And only on certain days, perhaps as the high holy days, that's when he feels close to God. But when a person's faith in God is deep, and when he reflects that God's benevolent providence extends to each and every person and to each and every detail and each and every minute, surely he must develop a profound sense of security and confidence. The concept of divine providence is better understood in the original term of hashgacha protit, or hashgacha protis, in the Ashkenazi pronunciation. For hashgacha protis means careful watchfulness, for which reason the term hashgacha is the one that is also used in connection with the law of kashrut, where every detail has to be carefully watched. Nor is another translation which is sometimes used in connection with divine providence, hashgacha pratit, namely supervision, entirely satisfactory in this case, because supervision implies overseeing. That is to say, seeing from above, whereas hashgacha, in the sense of God's watchfulness, means knowing matters through and through. The belief in such hashgacha pratis is basic to our religion and way of life, so much so that before every new year and during the beginning of the new year, we say twice daily, Psalm 27, God is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And from this it follows that even if things happen not as desired according to human calculations, and even if it seems that even according to the Torah, it should have been different, a Jew still puts his trust in God. You see, the fact that most times we won't understand why things happen actually isn't the point. We're not trying to play God or to understand his ways. Simply meditating on the fact that God is guiding our lives closely and purposefully, and meditating on the fact that the way things are is how the master of the universe wants them to be, in itself leads to acceptance and therefore resilience. The American author Byron Katie summed it up very well in her book that was entitled 1,000 Names for Joy, Living in Harmony with the Way Things Are. And she wrote, life is simple. Everything happens for you, not to you. Everything happens at exactly the right moment, neither too soon nor too late. You don't have to like it. It's just easier if you do. So the great Baal Shem Tov explored this part of our meditation on divine providence even further. Not only is everything directed by God and supposed to happen, beyond even that, everything that happens is part of the divine master plan of creation and plays an indispensable role in the ultimate purpose of existence. Not only is everything on purpose, everything is for a purpose. And this little change of word, one word, is absolutely enormous. It needs immense purpose and huge meaning to even the smallest occurrence. Text number 11 on page 97. The Baal Shem Tov taught that divine providence does not only mean that God orchestrates the individual movement of each of the manifold created entities, and that the same providence is actually determining the existence and life of that entity. It also means that the particular movement of a single entity bears a direct impact on the overall purpose of creation. Get your head around this. Take, for example, the slightest quiver of a solitary sliver of a plant flourishing in the belly of a forest, or upon some tremendous mountain, or in one of our planet's deepest valleys that has never been traversed by a human. The plant's movements to the right, to the left, forward or backward, throughout the duration of its lifespan, are actively determined by ongoing divine providence. God has issued a specific decree. This particular plant will live for a specific amount of months, days, and hours, and that during this time it will turn and bend in these directions a certain amount of times. And beyond all of that, however, each of these particular movements is significant for the overall purpose of creation. Each of these particular movements is significant for the overall purpose of creation. Through the combination and synthesis of all of the myriad particular occurrences involving countless millions of species and subdivisions that exist within all the four kingdoms, the sublime divine intent that underpins all of creation is consummated. Not only is every feature of every entity divinely orchestrated, it plays an indispensable role in the divine purpose of creation. I'm telling you, I begin to feel that my head is bursting, because to take in these concepts, they're so huge. It makes God so big, beyond anything that you might have imagined of who he is. And this is such a radical idea that it is almost unfathomable. How do you wrap your heads around the idea that everything that happens in the world, and even the smallest seemingly insignificant movement of a blade of grass, is directed by the divine hand for an overall cosmic purpose and is integral to the overall purpose of God's creation? The authors of this course have tried to help us visualize this with the metaphor of pixels. Take a look at figure 3.2 on page 98. Every moment and occurrence are like a single pixel. It may seem plain and meaningless in isolation, but it plays an integral part in the complete picture. Because a picture is made up of a collection of pixels. Actually, we can begin to understand this today because we're all looking at screens, and we're seeing whole pictures on these screens. But you know that these pictures are made up of pixels. And the genius of the people who manufacture these screens, they're able to pack in more and more and more pixels into the same amount of space to give us more and more clarity and vision. If you look at a single pixel on its own, taken out of the larger context of the image, it's a meaningless plain colored square that has no design whatsoever. But if you have thousands of these seemingly formless boxes joined together, they create a meaningful part of the image. And the untrained eye may not notice it, but if one were missing, just one pixel, the picture wouldn't be complete. We have a slide to help us with this over here. Each moment, oh, sorry, I have to share screen. Each moment contributes to the purpose of creation. Nice. So every occurrence and every experience is like a pixel, and the whole of history and the entire purpose of creation is the image. Now, we usually experience each moment or occurrence as it is on its own. We live our lives noticing what is immediate and right in front of us. And very often, we don't see the meaning of what is happening. Or worse, we sometimes see something that seems negative or confusing and question how it could possibly have purpose or be part of God's overall plan. But that changes if you meditate on the awareness that each moment is only a single pixel within an entire picture. If we'd be able to notice the larger image, we'd appreciate that the immediate moment that we experience as meaningless or unfortunate is actually integral to the whole of the world's purpose. And when it's joined together with everything else which happens, it's an integral piece of the puzzle that forms ultimately our redeemed world. Okay, that's a big meditation. But let's focus on this particular meditation a little bit closer to home. Forget the philosophical discussion for a moment about the blade of grass and how many times it's going to wave to the left or to the right or whatever. If everything in the world is on purpose and for a cosmic purpose, then your existence is also on purpose and for a cosmic purpose. God created you because you play an indispensable role in the cosmic drama of history. And he is guiding every detail of your life towards that purpose. Let's take a look at text number 12 on page 99. Just as we are enjoined to believe in God, so we must subsequently believe in ourselves. In other words, we must believe that God has provided us with a mission in life and that our lives are not meaningless, but rather that our souls come from God, the source of life, and God is delighted and satisfied when we execute his will. So you matter. Everything you do matters. And every moment of your life, every situation that you are confronted with is purposefully designed by God for you to achieve the unique purpose that only you can achieve. And so wherever you find yourself, and no matter what happens to you, you are supposed to be there. And you have a purpose to achieve. Text number 13 on page 100. We should recognize, and this is the great Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, one of the great of the Hasidic Rebbes. We should recognize and fully appreciate that our travels to various locations are not random. Each journey is specifically directed by God. Think about this next time you go on holiday, by the way. The divine intention in orchestrating these journeys is that each individual has been allotted a specific portion of the material world to spiritually rectify. Our portions are in specific locations to which we must journey. We accomplish these acts of rectification in a variety of ways, such as through studying Torah or praying at that location, or through eating, drinking, and sleeping there for the sake of properly serving God, or through another means of performing God's will in that place. The Baal Shem Tov associated this concept with the verse, God establishes the steps of man, from Psalm 37, meaning that a person's desire to relocate to a specific place is actually inspired by God for the purpose of that individual to engage in a particular aspect of divine service, thereby rectifying whatever this person has been appointed to rectify. So meditating on this perspective can reframe every part of our lives and can really help us to find meaning and purpose in even otherwise unfortunate circumstances. There was a wonderful man who lived in London here for quite a number of years, Rabbi Mendel Futterfass. I had the great privilege of knowing him. He was an extraordinary Jew of this past generation, and he served many, many years in Soviet work camps before he eventually was able to leave Russia. And he tells the following story. I was imprisoned in a Siberian labor camp for the crime of assisting my co-religionists in escaping the USSR in the dark post-World War II days. Many of my fellow inmates were professionals and intellectuals from the upper crust of society, imprisoned because of the ostensible threat that they constituted to Soviet ideology. This group often wondered how I maintained my cheerful demeanor despite the subhuman conditions of the camp. When they posed the question to me, I replied, "You are all dejected because your incarceration prevents you from materializing your life's goals. My goal in life is to serve God, and that I can do wherever I find myself." Because Reb Mendel, as a deep faith Jew, believed that life was directed by God, that God directed his life, and that whatever circumstances he was in had a purpose and an opportunity. And with that attitude, nothing could strip him of his dignity. And that is really our third Hitbonnut building tonight, that nothing happens by chance. Everything is part of a divine plan. We have our second meditation now from Rabbi Wolf.
Life isn't random. There is a subtle cause and effect relationship that operates in your life. And that cause and effect relationship relates to a master plan that the master planner ingrained within your soul and within the world. Our task is to recognize the turnings in life and be able to choose freely those that correspond to the master plan. Gently close your eyes. Just become aware of the silence in the room. Become aware of the emptiness of the space, and that you, as a ball of small energy, occupies a place in that space. become aware of your life. Go back to the beginning, early childhood. Observe the facets that seem to be recalled quickly about your childhood. Then your teenagehood. What incidents come quickly to mind? And adulthood. The transition within and between are catalysts. Catalysts that project you into the next phase of your life. The catalysts aren't arbitrary. Hashem places these catalysts into your life to keep nudging you towards a destiny, your personal destiny. Be aware that life is not random, but your capacity to reach your destiny quickly, clearly, painlessly, is part of your free choice, how you respond to the catalysts of life. Hashem imbues your life with purpose, but the way that you choose allows that purpose to be expressed optimally or less optimally. There's meaning to your life. The way you choose leaves footprints in the sands of time and in the world itself. Practice mindfully how to exercise choice so that your purpose overlaps with Hashem's destiny for you. And that way you achieve fulfillment, life's meaning, in a way that is painless, optimized, and in keeping with the intent of your reincarnation, why you, your soul, your innate plan plays a significant role in the world. You are special. God has embedded specialness, individuality in your life. Live your purpose.
So in our session tonight, we have built on the Hitbonnut meditation last week, in which we said that there is a spiritual force that underpins the whole of physical reality. And tonight we have tried to explain the nature of that spiritual force in three ways. The first building tonight was the recognition, the meditation that we are constantly in God's presence and that God is within every detail of the world, which then leads to a sense of joy. And therefore, everything is intentional. Everything that happens is intentional. And that helps us to live with adversity and to overcome struggle. and to accept with a degree of equanimity the things that happen to us in our lives. And thirdly, everything is part of the ultimate divine purpose of creation, and that therefore must lend every moment of our lives a sense of purposefulness and direction. And besides the specific application of each of these three elements of the meditation, together they form a perspective shift, not just in terms of our awareness, but taking us deeply into faith, deeply living with a sense of the divine presence. This is what we mean when we say that we want to see the world through the eyes of the soul, not through the body. This is the inner religious life of a Jew. This is what underpins or expresses our inner relationship with God. And therefore they are intended to make our lives richer and deeper and more meaningful. And look, we understand these meditations are very deep and they are counterintuitive to our human senses. And the most that we can achieve in these sessions is the beginning of an appreciation of these big ideas. But I think that they help us to shift our perspective on life even imperceptibly along the spectrum. And if that's the case, it's a start. The seed for growth is what we're planting. But of course, to be serious about this, it has to be nurtured by practicing meditations on an ongoing basis. So I guess once again, it's about trying to find a time with a few minutes a day or once a week, just to sit and to focus on these ideas and to analyze them and to think about how they might apply to the world, and more importantly, how they apply to your life and to your whole sense of connectedness with God. I guess we have to meditate on them. That's what it's about. And so next week, we're going to continue to build on our Hitbonnut meditation, taking it ever more deeply. And we're going to be teaching what it means to live in the present moment. But all of that is for next week. For now, we have our summary of tonight's lesson.
Lesson 3, Mastermind, the benefits of divine closeness.
Oh, sorry, I don't think you are.
God
sorry.
is the soul of the world, and his presence animates.
I'm just going to stop this over here. I realized that I actually didn't share screen on this over here. So these were the 3 takeaways for tonight. And here comes our lesson summary.
Lesson 3, Mastermind, the benefits of divine closeness. 1. God is the soul of the world, and his presence animates all of existence. 2. Every detail of creation is deliberately designed by God and is formed by a unique expression of his presence in that being. 3. God is with us always, and we can feel his presence. 4. Nothing is by chance. Everything that happens is directed by God and is supposed to happen. 5. Everything that happens is an integral part of the master plan of creation. 6. Each one of us, in every circumstance of our lives, is relevant and important to the overall purpose of existence.